Hello and welcome to Mr. C History. Now, we have recently celebrated International Women's Day, and so what I thought I'd do is I thought I'd dip into my archive to find out some of the stories of the many significant and incredible women who I've encountered on my journey so far. From, of course, the great teachings of Mary Wollstonecraft, the brilliant Jarrow MP, Ellen Wilkinson, Pocahontas out in Gravesend, and of course the great story of Lady Godiva. So come along and join me with all the amazing women I've met on my journey so far. Living in that priory was Leofric, Earl of Mercia, and significantly he had a wife known as Godiva, or Lady Godiva, very famous. Now there's obviously a very famous legend that goes with Lady Godiva, and the legend is that she was so saddened by the punitive taxes that her husband Leofric was putting on the people of Coventry, and she pleaded with him to say, can you please lower the taxes? Eventually he relented on one condition. He said, as long as you parade through the streets of Coventry on horseback whilst naked, I will lower the taxes. And true to her word, that is what she did. But there was a proclamation to say that all the locals had to close their shutters and turn away so they didn't see her naked, and her long hair was covering most of her delicate areas. But there was one traveller called Tom who peeped a look, and that is where we get the phrase peeping Tom from. And then Leofric kept his word and lowered the taxes. A brief little trip from our Gandhi in London tour takes us here to sunny Gypsy Hill, specifically to the house behind me. Behind the skip and behind the bougainvillea and overgrowth is a blue plaque to a woman called Annie Besant, who's quite an integral part of our history course actually. She was a philanthropist and a philosopher here in London and in Britain for a long time in the late 19th century, took part in strikes and was just there to support the poorer people in society. She took a great interest in India and indeed moved out there at the turn of the 20th century. And by the time of the First World War, actually had risen the ranks of the Indian National Congress Party to become the leader, the president of the Indian National Congress, and set up the Home Rule Leagues. Before the preeminence of Gandhi and Nehru, Annie Besant was there. She's got quite a significant history and a legacy, really. Some people might view her as a sort of white saviour, a British person coming over to push for Indian home rule. But at the same time, she could easily be seen as the person who laid the foundations which Gandhi and Nehru and others led to. But she lived here in Gypsy Hill in southwest London. Well, this is the lovely red brick Augusta and Kew Palace, and this is most associated with Princess Augusta, the Dowager Princess, and she is the person who's credited with starting the Royal Botanic Gardens here at Kew in 1759. She's an interesting person. She is the mother of George III, and she was the wife of Frederick, Prince of Wales, who was the heir to the throne. But he died aged 44. He was hit in the stomach with a cricket ball. He was one of the first very famous cricketers. He died before he could assume the throne, so his son George III took over, and perhaps in her grief, Augusta decided to create the Botanic Gardens here. It was expanded again by her son George III, and that's why it's Kew Gardens with a plural, because he took the gardens from Richmond Palace, which we've discussed with the Tudors, and brought them all together to make the Botanic Garden. Now, I've made my way all the way to St George's Churchyard in Gravesend in Kent on the trail of perhaps the most famous Native American of them all, Pocahontas. Now, there's lots of myths that go around, and we've just been to see John Smith. I'll tell you one there, but one of the first myths is she actually wasn't called Pocahontas. She had two official names, Amanut and Matuoka. But Pocahontas actually was her nickname, and it means spirited one or playful one, or some people think it might mean naughty one. Which is rather interesting. So there's the first myth. And the second myth I want to dispel right now, she didn't have a romantic liaison with John Smith. The Pocahontas Disney film lies about that. I think John Smith himself lied about it, but when they first met, he would have been 27, she would have been about 10 or 11, so no. I am in Penn Wood in Buckinghamshire at the Church of Holy Trinity, And this rather austere slab of concrete here is the grave of one of the key figures in the Jarrow March, the MP Ellen Wilkinson, that brave MP who voiced the concerns in Parliament and marched with the workers from Jarrow. She is laid to rest here. She had an amazing career after Jarrow March. She joined the government. She joined Clement Attlee's post-war government, and she was Minister of Education. Some of those amazing reforms that were brought in, national curriculum, etc., big part of it came from her. She also played a significant role in creating UNESCO, my favourite World Heritage Sites. Ellen played a key role in the UN there. But sadly, her death is rather tragic, really. She died aged 55 whilst Minister for Education. She died because she was suffering from chronic bronchitis and asthma, and she actually died of an overdose of barbiturates that had been given to her by a doctor. Now, some people say, well, maybe she was prescribed wrongly and it was too much. There is some suggestion that she took her own life. We unfortunately will never know, but such a tragic end to such an incredible figure. Now, Mary returned from Ireland despondent because she had had her life as a governess, looking after children, looking after a house, etc. And this made her very unhappy because she felt, is this it for women? Is this all that's available to them if, they're not provided with an education? So to that end, she returns back to London, specifically here to Newington Green, and sets up a school for young girls and women. And indeed, there's a plaque just over there in what looks like a school building that could possibly date from the 1780s, where she set up her school. Now, with this came lots of voracious reading. Mary was quite clearly a keen reader of political and philosophical thought. Indeed, she read Rousseau, but specifically she read John Locke, and this idea, who was a key liberal thinker at the time, this time of enlightenment, the 1780s, 1790s. John Locke's key idea was that in many ways human beings are a blank slate. When we're born, we have nothing put upon us. It is our reason, our rationality, our humanness comes from our experiences, and crucially our education, which links back to Mary again. She felt that women were downtrodden because of the lack of education. But it was here in Newington Green where she did a lot of that reading, and actually she also did a lot of talking and debating with other philosophers at the time, specifically here in this building. This is where Mary would have come along. And it says Unitarian. It was indeed a Unitarian chapel, also known as the Church of Dissenters. What were they doing? They were dissenting against the normality of Christian belief. They dissented against superstition, against the angels and all that sort of communion side of things and the bread of Christ. They firmly believed in the Christian mission, the mission to educate, etc., etc. And they felt that again, that is what you're not necessarily born with your reason. No, it's not necessarily God-given. It comes to you through your experiences, through your education. This is radical, and many of the philosophers at the time felt that this was going to be the rights of men. And now Mary Wollstonecraft comes in and says, well, what about women? Surely women are also part of this procedure. Where do women get their experiences from? Right hidden in the corner is a bust of Noor Inayat Khan, who, as it says there, lived from 1914 to 1944. This is a very interesting tale of an extraordinarily brave and courageous young woman. Her father was an Indian mystic and musician, and her mother was American. And when they were very young, they moved to Paris, and she grew up in Paris and between the wars, between First World War and Second World War, and she was destined for a career as a children's author. But sadly, World War II broke out. They had to move to London. Now, she was fluent in French, so she was recruited as somebody who could help in France, specifically in the SOE, the Special Operation Executive. So she was dropped into occupied France in June of 1943 as a radio operator under the codename Madeleine. Now, radio operators are extraordinarily dangerous because you had to put your voice out there. The Gestapo could easily track you, plus you were making noise if you were hidden in some sort of room somewhere. And she had to do most of this on her own, constantly moving from house to house. Sadly, by the October of 1943, a few months in, she was betrayed by one of her French collaborators and she was arrested. She was taken to Dachau concentration camp in Germany, and sadly, September of 1944, she was executed along with other members of the SOE, female members of the SOE. And it is recorded in the ledger at Dachau that her final word was liberté, because she was tortured and she was interrogated. She never gave up anything. Well, I'm standing here now at Tatnam Corner at Epsom Racecourse. You can just about see the corner there as the horses would have come down racing on a normal typical horse race. But on June the 4th of 1913, Emily Davison was standing about here, maybe closer to the number 3 just behind me there. She came here to make a protest. She had various different suffragette flags in her bag, and so what she decided to do was break the barrier, climb over the barrier, and run towards the king's horse, Anma, the king, who was at the race ground just around me here where we've just been, who was there, was here to watch his horse, but he watched a suffragette, Emily Davison, run out to the course and try and grab the reins of that horse. Unfortunately, however, she suffered some injuries, horrific injuries. She was taken to hospital 4 days later on the 8th of June 1913. She died of her injuries, a fracture to the skull. She received some hate mail at hospital from various different people, and even the Queen called her a horrid woman for what she did or what she tried to do as a protest. But it was here on this spot that one of the most significant and tragic events of the suffragette movement took place. Now there are of course many more, and I'm hoping many more that I will encounter as I go on along. So thank you ever so much for joining me. As always, please let me know what you think. Are there any other significant women I should definitely be looking into? And as always, I shall see you on the next one. Bye for now.